What's up, everyone? It's Spencer here from Scoped Exposure. I just wanted to jump on here and say a few words about our Patreon that we launched just under a month ago. It's been super cool and super humbling to see all the support, whether it's people signing up, shouting us out, sharing the video. It's been really awesome and a huge, extra learning curve for us as we are, uploading early access footage, doing exclusive content, bringing people into the process and production of what we're doing. I'm just really excited for the future because if this is only 30 days, I can't even imagine what, 300 days looks like for the Patreon side of Scoped. So the first podcast of every month, I'm going to be going through the new signups, the new people who are patrons, and shouting them out, as well as adding them to our master list that will run at the end of every single episode for that month. But this shout out is just for the first of the month. But without further ado, thank you to Jack D. Cooper, Matthew Burdett, Owen C., Jim Uag, one of those, Z, Mark Morin, Tajiri, Al McLeod, Matthew Meehan. Shout out Matt. Matt's been sending me a lot of great questions for podcast interviews. Jordan Krasman, Neil Bromley, Rick Langlos, Colin, username fucked up, which is glad you snagged that. Fifi, Ryan Bodium, Mike Brown, Alex Marshall, shout out to Witness Chamber, shout out to Boise, Dustin Tucker, Vaughan, Iati. Sorry, I butchered your last name, bro. Adam Cameron, Jake, Colin St. Mary, Joe Plunky, Thomas Hively, shout out to the Milwaukee homies, Risha Januska, Joyce, Sari Beebe, Lee from False Body, listen to False Body, Wiz Nelson, Chapel of Ghouls, follow DOA Promotions on Instagram, book shows with them for Calgary, Chris Smith, XONKLX, Tim D. Martino, Jack Walker, Andrew, Ethan T., Alexandra, Matthew from Ontario, because I've done this take multiple times and I keep butchering your last name, and then Mikhail Screamin'. So that's everyone who signed up on the Patreon as of our launch, and the cutoff again being at the end of February. I will do this every month with the new signups, but all those people will be in the master list. Thank you again for supporting Scoped in any way, whether it's through Patreon or not. If you want to do so, it's patreon.com/scopeexposure. All the tiers and all the info of how to get started there are there. And let's roll the episode.
But it was also an opportunity to show people what we were up to. Like, we're not sticking around. Like, we're actually trying to build something cool. And if I haven't returned your email, it's probably because I've been on top of the ladder all day, scraping a ceiling, rust off of a ceiling.
Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. This is another episode of the Scoped Exposure podcast. For those that have been following the show for a long time, we're into season 3 now. We're just north of 200 episodes, and I'm really trying to get a lot of bigger guests is one way to put it, but guests that have a lot of impact and guests that have done a lot for hardcore and DIY culture. And I think in the pursuit of doing that, someone that came to mind and someone that I've already been connected to, and it's less about, cold DMs and, asking a friend to ask them, is my guest today, and someone that I'm honestly very privileged to have been able to cross paths with through other ventures, and being able to have him now on the show just to talk about the label and what they've done in the hardcore space is very, very exciting to me. So without any further ado, Chris of Bridge 9 and Sully's brand on the Scoped Exposure podcast. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Spencer.
Absolutely. So, Chris, I'm sure there's a lot of people that know who you are, but for the like 1.5 people that are a little unfamiliar with who you are, you run Bridge Nine Records, which undoubtedly is a huge staple piece in hardcore lore. I think that there's been a lot of bands when I was first getting into this whole thing. Actually came out on your label. I think a lot of the early Cruel Hand stuff was like some of my first like CDs and records that I was buying, just because of like the cover art. And there's Sully's, there's the new storefront. There's a lot of stuff that I really want to get into, but yeah, I'm really excited to have you on the show. But before we get into the weeds and talk about music, we have to check some bevs. That's a must here on the show. So, what do you have beverage wise that you're going to be sipping on today?
So I got a bottle of water, and I got coffee.
Coffee in a very flamboyant looking.
Yeah. I borrowed this from my fiance Catherine.
Okay.
Mine wasn't clean, so. But I'm psyched. It's larger than mine, so I was able to hold more.
And I'm guessing, are you just like a black coffee drinker, or do you got something fancy that you?
So it's funny. I was always. I mean, for decades, I've been an iced coffee drinker, but like iced mocha latte. Like it has to have chocolate, it has to have ice in it. So Some people don't really consider me a coffee drinker. I know my daughter makes fun of me for it, and I don't know. I've done that for a long time, and just realized I was we were spending like $18 a day to get coffee.
Right.
And we're still navigating this opening of the storefront, and don't want to spend money that I don't have to. So I switched to black coffee, a little bit of creamer, and we're good.
Yeah, but have you switched over temperature wise as well?
Yeah. So I'm a hot coffee guy, and honestly, it's funny. I was telling Catherine that the good feeling that the iced mochas was giving me has been replaced by the good feeling of not spending $18 every day. So like I've got like I'm feeling good. I'm adjusting to the to the change, and
yeah.
Life goes on.
Yeah. And to your point, I think if you're a mocha or iced coffee drinker, I don't think that demeans your coffee credibility by any means. Like, that's my wife's go-to order, hot or cold, is a mocha with oat milk. I have a left and right brain, I think, on this issue, because I'm the same way, where it's like, man, that drink's $7, but if I just get an Americano or a black coffee, that's $3. So, it's I love how the motivator is hey, maybe I don't have to be spending double digits of money for one coffee, and I can just get one. So,
Exactly.
Yeah. So I wanted to make sure that I had a good beverage for you for this episode, because this has been something I've been looking to for multiple weeks, and there's a bit of like a weird thing where it's like, I want to have special bevs for special episodes. Not to say that other episodes aren't important. It's just, this is something that that I think deserves something a little more than just a sparkling water or, something else. So I'm going to be drinking what's called a Big Bang, which is by a brand called Loop. So they do these cold pressed juices. So I haven't had this flavor before, but it's honeydew, melon, grape, raspberry, pomegranate, and lime. Canadian company. I've had like the couple of the other flavors from them, but I wanted to try something brand new for a brand new podcast with you. So
nice.
It's already shook, but before I take a sip, I'm going to cheers you, my friend, and again, really excited to do this.
Cool. I'm excited to be here, and I appreciate it.
Of course. That is very good. Not my favorite from them, but I think it's got a little bit more health benefits than maybe like this just tastes like super orange juice, if you know what I mean. So Chris, any new guests that I have here on the show, I always kind of ask the same intro question about like how they even just discovered punk music, hardcore music, DIY culture, however you want to spin it. I know you've done so many interviews, and I know a bit about your backstory. So either if you want to do the Coles Notes version or the super long version, whatever floats your boat. Just tell me about like some of the pivotal times that put you on the path of being in the hardcore scene and finding out about the sonic side of things?
Cool. Well, so for me, it was I was a headbanger. I was a teenage thrash metal fan and found punk and hardcore through a lot of the thrash metal bands that were also repping like Slayer repping the Dead Kennedys, or Metallica with the Misfits covers that they did on the Garage Days records. So those were for me gateways, I think. So at first, I started into thrash metal, death metal, kind of, but I was also a skateboarder. And I think when you are a skater, and you're a teenager, you're almost given the Minor Threat discography. And so you kind of, dabble a little bit and kind of go down those different rabbit holes as much as you can at that time. And after a little while, I think I realized that I was personally resonating with the lyrics from hardcore bands than more than I was thrash metal bands, right? Because I loved Obituary, but I didn't, songs about demons and death and everything, while I think were shocking and exciting for a suburban teenager, it didn't really click as well as what I was hearing from hardcore bands. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what kind of got me on that path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is funny to even thrash bands today, where there are some bands that will write, very personal stuff and kind of in the hardcore route. I've always identified hardcore as being like writing about the things where it's not really like pulling the curtain of like, oh, should we be knowing these things? But it's enough to know that you're not alone in something. But to your credit, like there are thrash bands that are just like, even today, they're like, oh yeah, this is about warfare and fighting demons and fighting dragons, like whatever mythical creatures you want to insert into the sentence there.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I love bands like Nuclear Assault, and I will listen to that today. But I think at some point at that pivotal time, it was just like, this kind of speaks to me more.
Mm-hmm. So during all of this, like you are growing up in Connecticut. So when did going to shows start? Like, what was the scene like when you were first going there?
For me, it was early 90s. I was probably 15, 16 years old, carpooling with friends. Connecticut had a really active scene. There's multiple cities where bands would come through and hardcore shows would happen, whether it was, New Haven or West Hartford or New Britain. So there was always something going on, and it was still close enough where if we wanted to go to Providence, it was an hour away. New York City was 2 hours, or an hour and a half away. So there was a lot of opportunities and a lot of bands that came through.
Yeah, there's especially like, because I always like to, even if a guest that has a lot of tenure behind them, I always like to connect it to the current and what's happening right now. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of buzz within the Northeast right now with a lot of like really staple bands. So it's kind of interesting to me how there's constant ebbs and flows to different scenes and who's popping and what parts of the country people are, or not the hottest bands are coming from, but the ones that are getting the most attention and making the most moves right now. So, so you're going to these bands, or seeing these bands and going to these shows. The idea of a label kind of, you didn't come out of the womb like, I'm going to start one of the biggest hardcore record labels of all time. It was almost not an accident, but it kind of just happened very organically, and certain releases like really popped, and made it become something like, oh, I think there's something I can work on here. But I guess like, what was the one why behind, taking up a venture like that and going into the unknown that way for you?
So when I was 19, I was at college in Vermont, a few hours away from my hometown. It was a small scene there. I didn't really know the people doing things in Vermont and Albany, where we would also go to see shows. So as I was getting my bearings, I wanted something that would keep me connected to my friends back home and to the scene that I had kind of come out of. So I ended up putting out my first 7-inch, and it wasn't even like, I'm going to start a label. It was just like, I want to see if I can do this one thing.
Right.
And I had friends that were in a band. they had kicked out their singer, and their guitar player was now singing for the band. They wanted to put something out so that, when they could play shows, they'd have something with their new kind of lineup. And I was just in the right place at the right time, and put out a split 7-inch with this band Tenfold from Connecticut that I went to high school with, and then this band Some of All Fears that were just like a new band that were friends with the guys in Tenfold, and they were playing shows together. So it was just an opportunity just to put something out. I mean, I came up with a label name, but I didn't know if I was going to put out a second release. It was just something just to try it, I guess, just see if I could do it.
So, Chris, is there anything specific about the number 9 when it came to naming the label once it came to that decision? Like, is there a reason that it's not Bridge 876? Like, talk to me about like that decision for you.
So the number 9, for whatever reason, at that time just stood out to me. It was something that I think it just popped up in my life a lot. And I had originally wanted to use the name Bridge Records. And you couldn't Google back then, but I think I was able to find out that there already was a label called Bridge Records. So I was going to shows in the Boston area from Vermont, and on the highway headed into Boston, there was like each bridge had its own number. And I saw the one that said Bridge 9. And I was like, that I like the ring too. I like the ring of that. I'm going to use that.
Yeah.
So it stuck.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Like, I think I don't know if there's any specific reasons for the number 9 resonating for you, but for me, it was like, I think it was just my very like, just childhood kind of mindset where it's like, well, it's the highest single digit number, so it's obviously the best. And then like, being Canadian, like Wayne Gretzky also wore 99, and it's like, well, that's the highest jersey number that you can have, so it's obviously the best, and the GOAT is wearing it. So no, that's funny that there was already something, and you thought, okay, well, I can throw a number on it, and saying it out loud, it's like, oh, that makes the most sense. Like Bridge 7, maybe there's an alternate timeline where that's the thing, and had no effect, but I think Bridge 9, out of all the singular numbers, stands the strongest, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's worked, which is cool. I mean, I wanted to choose a name that didn't have any meaning originally. I mean, Bridge was loosely part, like I included that because it was something that it brings two places together, and that was kind of the metaphor for what I was trying to do with the label. I was in Vermont. I wanted to connect with my friends and scene in Connecticut. So I felt like that was something that, kept me motivated. I wasn't just sitting in a dorm room somewhere. Like, it was something to work on. I had a lot of energy, I was ADHD. I was always having trouble focusing, and starting the label really gave me something to kind of obsess over and focus on and follow through with.
Yeah. So 2 things I want to break down there. The first being going back to like, you've talked about in other interviews, like you felt like you were a spectator, and start doing, at least putting out a 7-inch for your friends' band was a way to get involved. Have you never like played in a band, fronted a band, nothing like that?
Yeah. So I never learned an instrument. I mean, I tried, but again, I had trouble focusing, so I never followed through. I never had the dedication to do it. I think the closest I've ever come to it was I did the vocals on some song for Lego years and years ago.
Right, we have talked about that on this podcast.
Yeah. So I mean, that was funny because a friend of mine was hired to write the song, and just thought it'd be funny. Like, hey, like, do you want to sing on this? And I did it, and actually, it came out cool. Maybe again in an alternate timeline, I could have fronted a band, but it wasn't in the cards for me. I was so focused on doing the label, and by the time the label really got its legs under it, I had no bandwidth for anything else.
Right.
So
yeah. Just to quickly hit on that Lego video, was that an official thing with Lego, or is that just like,
No, it was official. So I had somebody working at Bridge 9, this guy Seth, who was started like in the mailroom and kind of worked his way up over the years. And his brother worked at Lego and it was like he helped produce their Lego TV show. So he was into music and wanted to kind of have that influence come over to Lego. Obviously, they have a big audience and resources. So he worked with Jay Moss, who was in Defeater, to write a few different songs, different styles. And for the hardcore song, I was tapped to sing on it. So, it's fun, but it actually turned out pretty good.
Mm-hmm. So. It's very funny that we're talking about this because, obviously, music and all of that was like a big part of my life. But one of the very first, I talk a lot on this podcast about like one of the very first early like video things that helped me get on the path of my career and other things that I've been a part of was a thing called machinima, which is like making videos using video games, because I definitely had a big like Xbox 360, Nintendo. That's still a huge part of my life, but even prior to that it was all like stop motion animation. So when I saw there's a hardcore show like stop motion thing and like there's mosh pitters and people like doing guitar solos and stage divers, I was like, this feels like it was made for me.
Yeah.
And it's I think there's been a lot of crossover events in hardcore, certain bands, getting opportunities to like play late night shows and different collabs with other big bands, but like nothing is more household than Lego. So
Yep.
I don't know if Lego has had a pulse on hardcore since then, or maybe there's something down the line, but I would love to see if there's some kind of like I don't know what you think about that, if there's like Lego sets for like different bands that could come out
I
over
think
time.
I saw a CBGB one, and I don't know if it was a fan made one or if it was an authorized thing, but I did hear that Lego is moving their headquarters in the United States to Boston. Like it was on the news like 2 weeks ago. So who knows? Maybe a door opens.
Behind the scenes stuff. It's funny because I like to talk about this, that if and when it does happen, then it's like, well, Chris and I already talked about it in February of 23. So
Yep.
I don't know if there's current hardcore band, or non-current, like as far as a legacy act, would you buy a personal like Lego set? So it had all the band members and maybe, a band van or something. Like who would be the one that you would like, no, I want to have this on my desk?
I feel like I'm surprised the Misfits haven't made one yet.
True. Yes.
That seems like that would be a no-brainer.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe an agnostic front. I'd love to have a little Vinny Stigma Lego figurine. So
no, it's so hilarious that you did that, and maybe there's something down the line where you're doing more than just a Lego song when it comes to vocals. But we'll see. But the other piece that I wanted to jump to is something that I heard as a theme for different reasons for doing different things as far as the label or different things in your life, is like seeking that like interpersonal connection point with someone. And that could either be a friend, that could be someone that you're selling a record to. Like you talked about that as a huge reason of why you wanted to do a storefront versus, having, a warehouse that, sometimes people could visit if they asked in advance or whatever. So like, what inspired that? Have you always kind of had that like close knit, like I need to have face-to-face connection with people even before discovering hardcore, or was hardcore the thing that helped fan that flame a little bit more? I'm like getting really like nitty gritty on it, but like it's something that I've noticed off of a lot of the why behind what you do.
I've always been social, but I also kind of fight with being awkward and not like I'll go someplace and I try to go out of my way to say hello to people, but there's definitely times where like I'm just like in the kind of I kind of stand back and I don't put myself out there, which I hate to think would be interpreted as like I'm not trying to talk to people, or I really do like to engage with people, but sometimes like it's hard. So like I think that's part of the always trying to push yourself and create opportunities to engage with people, because I feel like all the cool things that I've been able to do, it's all been because I've collaborated with somebody. It's not because I just had this great idea and I just ran and did everything myself. Like I am very DIY, but you never know what random door might open. So I'll talk to random people all the time because that's where you learn. Oh, so and so's got this connection, and there's this cool opportunity that neither of you would have ever known. But now that it's out in the open, you can connect.
Mm-hmm. I think I was listening to a podcast where you were mentioning like it was uh, the new store that you have wasn't even open, but you were working outside and someone came by and was kind of like looking in, and
Yeah,
there's a timeline where you could have just like totally ignored, and they like even a split second could have gone by, even an ounce of hesitation, and that person could have just gone by. But the fact that you like reached, you said what's up, and then you noticed the half heart shirt, and then you brought him inside, and then you're showing him the half heart last show from 2009, and he's pointing himself out, and then it's like this.
yeah,
That to me is like something that's super commendable, and just super cool, because I am the same way. As I like to chase those curiosities. There are a
yeah.
lot of times where um like like just a very recent example is we do a podcast series where we feature new music, and we do like a listening style party. And there was a band from Montreal that I was unfamiliar with as a Canadian. Really liked their music, put them on, reached out to them, found out one of the members was putting on a fest, and then we're like, fast forward, we're in charge of covering that fest, just a few months later. So hearing some of the stories from other interviews that you've done where you keep a lot of the mail that has gone in and out of the Bridge 9 machine. I think that's like invaluable stuff. And even if it's not like, oh, this is leading to the next big business thing or big opportunity, it's like something to be, I think, to be like really proud of, to have all these like documented connection points.
Well, I think as a label, it's important. You become an archivist just by default.
Hmm.
You are tasked with keeping track of everything, and things that don't seem like a big deal or important at the moment, with the context of and looking back 10, 15, 20 years later, they can become very important. Like you referenced, I kept a lot of the mail order letters that I would receive in the 90s. And most people, I think everybody just threw them out. I think maybe, Ian Mackay is the only other person that kept all his mail orders from, and letters from back then.
Sure.
And I think for me, it was just, this was how I was communicating with people from all over the country and all over the world. And I just kept them in a box. Thankfully, my warehouse space has grown every time I've had a growing pain. I've moved into a bigger space or been able to keep things. So I was never really in a position where I had to just throw everything out and start over or downsize. So I kept all this stuff, and it was, 10, 15, 20 years later, I was going through it. I mean, these are things that have been locked away in a basement for decades. And you start to see names that are still around, right? And like people that I ended up working with. So, when we did our the Bridge 9 first 9 years box set, it was an opportunity to kind of go through and say, oh shoot, like I got a mail order in 1997 from Todd Jones. And
Yeah.
that was before he started Carry On. And then we put out multiple records. In fact, 3 of his bands were featured on Bridge 9. And so we had that story with, I don't know, a dozen different people that started as fans and people that mail ordered from us in the 90s and the early 2000s, and then started their own bands and were a part, it kind of became a part of the story again.
Yeah. It's very wild to be on a podcast, and I talk to people, probably it happens a lot more with like the Canadians that I have on, but where there's like, oh, I was at that show, and it was my first hardcore show experience, or whatever it is. And that to me is like, and it's a selfish reason why I do this podcast, is because there's documentation points off of bands that are growing, like for myself that's growing. And what's interesting too is that like I've always looked at archiving and documenting through the live set side of things, because it like Hey 56 was like a huge inspiration for me to get started on what I was doing. But to your point, I do think that there is a lot to be said with the archival of the bands, even if they're in their first couple stages? What band out of the entire roster do you feel like, obviously there's bands that maybe were on Bridge 9 for one release and then went on to a major or broke up and did something else. But what do you feel like is the best showcase of like the document, how you documented a band in their, in their existence? Does any bands come to mind when it comes to that?
Um, I mean, it was only for the two 7 inches, but American Nightmare was a good one. I mean, I was very, very hands-on at that time, and I kept everything.
Mm-hmm.
So, whether it was all the flyers from their shows that they played and I went to, or, the elements of the demo and the handwritten lyrics, or original t-shirt designs, that's stuff that I wanted to hold on to and kind of use that to be able to tell their story down the road. Or bands like Terror, when we filmed their live set in 2003, which is wild. I mean, it was literally 20 years ago, but we had 4 or 5 camera angles and filmed them when they played out in on the West Coast. I mean, you put out the records, but you also as a label try to continue to document the band beyond just the music.
Right.
And so, to that point, I try to keep everything and then continue to tell their, help tell their stories and promote their efforts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Terra's a band that they have gone and touched so many different record labels, so everybody's got a piece of that. But I do agree that like being able to continue on in being able to resurface like older recordings or do like anniversary pressings like that's really, really cool. So I want to shift gears a little bit here, Chris, because I think something that's been very interesting to me is, at least in my time in hardcore, on how it's not the most popular label at the time kind of like shifts every year, but at least in the last, call it the post-pandemic boom that is happening right now with hardcore and new kids coming to shows, it seems like there's been all these different things of like, oh, well, if we want to get signed, we have to get on X label. And that has changed a lot, especially in the last 5 years. And, I heard an interview where you were talking about how, back in the day, like it was kind of like Bridge 9, Victory, Equal Vision, and Revelation were kind of like, not the big four, but those were some of the most prominent ones. And Bridge 9 was a little early to a lot of the hardcore stuff. And then I think Victory and all those other places kind of picked up a little bit afterwards. And you've also talked about like how, you've had your hands full with a lot of things and, different focuses. And, there's people online who might be like, oh, like Bridge 9 is just like a legacy label now. But then you put out a band like Roll Call and it's like, oh, there's still things going on. So just from your perspective, like, is it normal to you to have that shift where it's like, maybe we aren't like the number one spot for bands to be going for, and this other up and comer that is putting out a lot of stuff should take the reins, and we can still exist, but we're going to be back here. Like, I just wanted to get your perspective on that.
Sure. I mean, so for me, when I was starting Bridge 9, there was like, I guess the big three at that time for me was Equal Vision, Revelation, and Victory. Because early, 80s into 90s, those three really not only were documenting some of the best bands, but they were getting them out everywhere. And so I kind of came in right, I think, as a lot of those labels, I can't speak for all three of them, but I feel like they weren't putting out the kind of hardcore that I was excited about. They had, right? Like all those labels had put out all bands that I loved, but I think just in their natural kind of evolution as a label, they were focusing on just at that time, just bands that, I don't know, I'm not going to say that they were more commercial, but like maybe more indie, more metal. Like they weren't kind of the nitty gritty hardcore bands that I liked. So I was just in the right place at the right time. And in those early 2000s was able to put out whatever record I wanted and really just, did a ton of stuff, which was great. But obviously that lifespan of a label, or not a lifespan, but like kind of like the kind of like the evolution of a label, it ebbs and it flows. And you're not always, I mean, very few people are always on the way up. So, you kind of work with whatever's out there. I mean, as a label, you're not creating the bands, you're finding bands that you like and helping, kind of, raise their profile. So you can really only work with what's out there. So sometimes you have great bands to work with and you're able to keep going up. Sometimes they're not. I mean, the scene changes, the sound changes. You might be late to it, right? So like as a label, we've always kind of been focused on hardcore and punk, but I think people do try to pigeonhole Bridge 9, but there's a lot of different bands that we've worked with that don't fit into that kind of square hole, kind of like peg kind of metaphor.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think you as a label and as a band, I mean, there's lots of bands that if you're around for 30 years, you're going to be up, down, kind of in the middle. You're going to have records that people love, records that people hate. And I think as you're continuing to grow as a band, like that's a very similar path that a label has. So, I think at one point, Bridge 9 was coming up and people like, at Equal Vision were like, what the fuck? We should have had that band. But I was there,
Right.
and I was faster. And, obviously now you've got labels like Triple B that are just crushing it. And I think Triple B is doing a lot what like Bridge 9 was doing just 10 years earlier.
Yeah.
So that's just part of the natural progression. I think as a label, we never want to be a legacy label. Like that's like, I don't ever want to just be like, this is the time that we documented and that's it. And we just kind of like, I don't know, continue to sell that one little,
or put it around or yeah.
Like I think for me, the balance is, continuing to honor the catalog and the legacy that you have as a label, and that you've built over the years. But you got to keep bringing in new blood and keep expanding, and I think that, some labels, they change their sound, they kind of like go in a different direction. But again, I'm 47. I started it when I was a teenager. Like the things that I'm into have changed. I mean, but I'm still very focused on what we do. Right. So like when I was in my early 20s, I was like, I only like hardcore, fuck everything else. And, that's just being in your 20s and not having an open mind. And then your artists that you work with are also growing. And so you'll see a lot of labels where you'll have artists that'll return with their new bands and it doesn't sound the same as the last band, but like you have this 5 or 10 or year longer relationship with this person and you believe in what they're doing. And so you want to support their efforts.
Right.
I mean, I think you saw that Revelation was like the perfect poster person for that because they had all these straightforward hardcore bands in the 80s that were sick. And then all of the people in those bands came back in the 90s with things that were different, but still sick. So, you continue to evolve. And for us, I mean, over the last few years, obviously we've had our eye on something else, right? It's, we got kicked out of our building. We had to move and, renovate this old space and build this record store. So I didn't have the bandwidth or the funds to be able to invest in new bands. And so like we just said, all right, we made a conscious decision to say, all right, we're going to not look for new bands for now. Definitely want to, just have to kind of deal with this first, get a solid foundation, and then we can build off of that.
Right.
So
it's interesting to me how I said the big four and I included you with the big three that you said. So when you started coming up and, started to get really scrappy and like kind of snag those hardcore bands that you really wanted to put out that maybe an Equal Vision or a Victory was like maybe just a little too late to the game was at the time, were you concerned or worried about like stepping on toes, or were you just so like, I want to just continue to do my thing? And like, because I'm asking that in the sense that a really recent interview we did with a friend of the show, Lumpy, who runs Days Records, also a Connecticut based label, and we were just talking about like, did you feel like when you got things started? Because to your point, it's not like you're not just like creating these bands, you're discovering this and getting to put it out. Um, and he was like, like I have a group of friends that we talk to, but I have to imagine that they're, especially like maybe way back in the day, there was a little bit of like, not resentment, but like different things where it could have gone a little sour, if anything. I don't know if you want to clarify or correct the record on any of that. When at least you were starting.
Um, Early on, probably not. I remember famously there was, the American Nightmare demo. Tim had been in 10 Yard Fight, had a long relationship with Equal Vision.
Mhm.
So out of respect for that, they sent the demo to Equal Vision for consideration. I remember at the time it wasn't, it's a cool demo, but it wasn't. It was rough, I think, when they recorded it, and it just, I think Equal Vision was looking to do other things maybe, and just didn't take it seriously at that moment. Which thank God, because if they had signed them off the gate, right out the gate, then I probably Bridge 9 might be a totally different thing. I wouldn't have had that spark.
Yeah, we
I
probably
wouldn't
wouldn't
have
be
had that
sitting
push.
here.
Yeah, at that moment,
Right.
But so they sent it to him out of respect, and he passed. They passed, and I was able to do those next two records, which was obviously a huge, great, cool opportunity for me to kind of like jumpstart the label.
Mm-hmm.
But there's definitely been other labels that I'm friendly with that there is a little bit of competition, but not really. I mean, even labels that I was competitive with over years, you get to the point where you start to kind of carve out your own niche, and so it's not as competitive, I think, as some people might make it out to be.
Yeah, sure. Um, to that point though about American Nightmare, like, they were like, well, we've done stuff with Ecovision before. Let's send it to them. They pass on it. I'm sure there's like, there's been nights where it's like, I can't believe like that's the one that got away for them potentially. What's
Well,
the
they got it right away. I mean, they we put out those first two 7 inches. Obviously, all the excitement and momentum that started off of that made the band a lot more interesting, I think, to Equal Vision,
Sure.
and they signed them immediately.
Right. So yeah, maybe there was at least a second chance there for redemption.
Yeah.
But when you think about like I'm sure there's been thousands of demos and bands that have tried to send things your way. And I think I heard on a podcast where you were you had hesitated to listen to the Have Heart demo when it was sent to you. Not because you didn't want to listen to it, but you were busy, life goes on. But then once you heard it, you're like, oh, there's something very special with this band. And that's when I think of Bridge 9 as far as roster wise, Have Heart's always in the top 3 of bands that are
Sure.
associated. But what's the one band for you that got away, that hit your inbox? Either you missed it, you passed on it, and they went off. And not to say that you're choked and completely bummed about it, but you're like, oh, that if I would have known, I would have acted a little different.
Sure. Well, that's the thing. You never know at the moment, right?
Mhm.
Like, it's a band might make total perfect sense, but you just don't have any money to invest in them. Or you have a band that's similar at that moment that you feel like as a label, we have kind of our niche, but you don't want to have 5 of the same bands. You want to kind of work with bands from different areas. You want to work with bands that have a little different sounds and stories. So, you might sign a band from one city, and then there's another band that might even be better from that city, and you have the opportunity to work with them, but you don't, because you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. You want to kind of, as a label, I've always wanted to work with bands from different areas, because it kind of helps raise awareness for all the bands in each area. So I have gone on record as saying Comeback Kid was a band that I think was on my radar really early on, and at the time, I was given their demo, and I also had the Champion demo, and they were both very similar. And
Right.
I thought at that moment, right, like I was just like, oh, two bands with Canadian members that have a boxing theme, and at that time, and sometimes obviously it worked out for them. They've gone on to really incredible things, and they're still doing stuff, and that's great.
Right.
But you don't have the foresight of knowing what's going to happen, so you just work with whatever information you have right in front of you at that moment.
Right. Yeah. And I think like one of the early things that I learned, even if a band is like self making all of their merch and records and any like things to sell, like there's inarguably there's always been a project that you have been sitting on stuff for multiple years without like before you're just giving it out. And that could be tapes, CDs, 7 inches, whatever you have. But that's almost like X 1,000 for someone like you, where you have like so many bands that like, not to say that they're not great records, but maybe they just didn't translate on the recording or the marketing, or there's so many factors there. But what's your oldest? Do you know what your oldest like stock item is for Bridge 9?
In terms of that we still have that's
Yeah.
available?
Yeah.
Oh goodness, I'm not even sure offhand. But we've had stuff like, we've had great records. I remember Cops and Robbers, long sold out, long gone. But that was a record that stuck around for a while, and we probably had 10 years after they stopped playing shows.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just a great record. They didn't get out there as much, and so it doesn't move as fast. But it doesn't really. It shouldn't take away from the band and the record, but there's so many things in play. It can't just be just a good record. The band has to be out there and touring. They have to, it has to resonate with people.
Yeah. There's so much good music now that it can't just be someone at the storefront being like, oh, this cover's cool. But it's like, we've actually been sitting on that for 15 years. So thank you for buying it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'll use that as a bit of a segue. So the last we spoke, not on the podcast, just through other stuff, was you were mid building the new storefront that is Bridge 9 and also Sully's. That's been open for I think 6 months at this point of recording the episode.
Yeah, just under 6 months.
Yeah. But like, probably by the time this is out, like it's been a 2-year build process, lots of things. And something that was interesting to me, we talked a lot about documenting bands, but there was a lot of documentation that you were doing through Instagram, through the stories of yourself doing like, at least from my perspective, everything. So was the idea of doing that intentional, or was it like, hey, maybe this is a nice way for people to know that, we're not putting out like a bunch of new records right now because I'm like literally just like painting and like tearing up concrete and all this stuff, or was there like another idea or foresight to that?
Well, so this was this kind of renovating this building that has become Bridge 9's new headquarters and store. Is easily the biggest project I've ever tackled, and I didn't plan for it. This is the sort of thing that companies plan years in advance, and it just kind of dropped on me, and it's like, all right, we need to find something new immediately, and we have to make it work. And so doing all the updates on Instagram was an opportunity to kind of to show the transformation, because some of it was wild. A lot of these things I was doing for the first time, but it was also an opportunity to show people what we were up to. Like, we're not sticking around. Like, we're actually trying to build something cool. And if I haven't returned your email, it's probably because I've been on top of a ladder all day, scraping a ceiling, rust off of a ceiling.
Right.
So, it's something that this is because I think next week it'll be this 2 years from when we got the keys to the space. They say when you're with real estate, they say to find the shittiest building or the shittiest house on the nicest street. And we found, I think, the shittiest building with the best bones on a really busy street. So um, my budget for renovating it was used up very quickly. And I was only able to do it to bring the building up to code, basically. So, things like putting in a handicap accessible door and, fixing the windows and replacing the lintels in the front of the building, putting in a fire, like there was nothing fire in this building in terms of strobe lights or smoke detectors or the fire poles. None of that stuff existed because the last time this building really changed hands was, in the 80s, and before that in the 60s. And it was to the same company, and they just didn't update anything.
Wow.
So
crazy.
Anything cosmetic, anything demo, anything that I could do on my own, I started doing. And I've, of course, thankfully had some help. I always have to give Larry Kelly a shout out because he is the gentleman that came in about a week into the process and was like, I can help you. And he's a carpenter and jack of all trades, and has loaned me all sorts of equipment and expertise and time to kind of help push this along. But yeah, so putting everything on Instagram was just a way of showing people like, hey, we're still here, we're still doing stuff. But hopefully, I don't know, I think now looking back, it's actually kind of cool to be able to show a photo of like this really shitty back kind of garage warehouse space and then show what we've done, and a lot of it is just been elbow grease and hard work, so for me, every night, every weekend has been kind of part of this continual process of renovating. So the store opened, it looks great. There's still some things I need to add to it, build up the inventory and some of the ephemera that we want to kind of show off from the label's history. We have to continue to add, but now my energy has been focusing on the warehouse, and we still don't have a 100% operational warehouse. We have a lot of our inventory in the basement, and some of it's upstairs, but now we have to kind of keep going back and forth. And the hope is in the next few weeks, all that will be in the back and we'll be able to continue moving forward. And I'll be wearing less, contractor hats and more just focus on the
less
label
hard
hats.
Less hard hats, more Vans Authentics or whatever.
Yeah, and we want to.
Right.
There's a couple different bands that we're looking at, and there's things that we're looking to continue doing. We're not going to do what we at one point we were putting out 20 to 30 new releases a year, much like Triple B is doing now. God bless them, because I don't have the energy anymore to do it.
Yes, Sam's hard at work.
Oh, he crushes it. And so what I'm hoping to do is continue to find 6-8 bands every year that we can put out new music for and kind of continue what we've always done, but give it the care and attention that it deserves, while also pushing the catalog that we've built over almost 3 decades and the legacy of all these artists that we've worked with. Because we've got bands like Have Heart that we were kind of really early on with, and then saw through like their most of their time as a band. And then there's also lots of artists like Terra where we were there at the very beginning, and then they've continued on to really cool things. So we want to continue acknowledging all these artists and pushing their records.
Yeah. So to go back to the construction side of things, and don't take this personally, you do not strike me as someone that's like, oh yeah, I swing a hammer all day. That like you know. So, and it sounds like the idea, or it wasn't really an idea like, let's open a storefront. It's like, oh, we need to make a shift here, because I think you have said that the last place you're at, you're like the building was getting sold, so you needed to get out. Yeah. So like, was it still a little bit of, I guess, like your ADHD where you're like, no, like I will do this, versus like hiring a company to do that? Or was that just purely like, we don't have the funds to be able to do that, so like I will actually DIY this shit myself?
Yeah, well, so we did hire a contractor to do like the heavy lift, like they build the bathrooms, to do the electrical work, to the fire, and all that stuff. We had somebody help us with. but that money gets spent very quickly.
Yeah.
And you only
Those
can
aren't
do it.
things that you can't YouTube how to set up
Yeah.
a
And I mean,
fire extinguisher.
I've YouTube the shit out of things, and like, oh, how do you do this? How do you do that? And that's been an incredible resource for me. And it's been an opportunity for me to learn a ton. I mean, I learned how to patch holes on a asphalt roof, watching YouTube videos and going
Right.
up there, going to Home Depot, buying the stuff. And, it's actually really satisfying to spend an hour watching videos, go get some supplies, spend $100, and then do $1,000 repair, for 2 hours of your time. I mean, a few weeks ago, I installed carpet in our office. I had inherited. There's a this is a great story. So a Best Buy that is near us left a mall, and we had the opportunity to go in and take a bunch of their stuff that they had left behind. And this guy Dennis, who is a fan of Bridge 9, reached out to me and said, "Hey, he works at this mall. The Best Buy had left. He was familiar with the story and our renovation, and said they might have some things that you could use." So he sent me some photos from this big empty Life After People style image of Best Buy, and I was able to grab some ladders and a whole ton of pallet racking shelves. But like little things, like there was a stack of their carpet squares, these perfect like dark gray, commercial carpet squares that were on one of their shelves, and we grabbed them all. And I had gotten a quote for like just under $3,000 to have the floors finished in our office. And I was like, I'm not going to spend $3,000 on
I'm
that.
going to take Best Buy's old carpet.
And arguably, so the carpet was, I would have bought it. It was exactly what I would have wanted. So I was lucky there. It wasn't like some weird orange and it was just free. Like it was exactly what I would have wanted.
It wasn't in the Geek Squad section of Best Buy. It's just the normal standard stuff.
Yeah, it was nice. And but we have tile floor, like this old tile floor with grout lines, and I'm watching these videos and learning. All right, well now I have to skim coat concrete on these floors. So I had to. It became a whole weekend. I mean, it was like a really big project.
Right.
But I have this beautiful carpeted floor in the office now, and everything's buttoned up and looks great. And it was just my time, and maybe like $150 worth of concrete and adhesives and some other things that I had to get.
Yeah. That's absolutely wild, and that is such a classic like hardcore kid mindset when it comes to things like, there's people that just don't have that DIY mindset when it comes to just like either playing shows or just doing things in their regular life. But I think when you get the satisfaction of being able to piece something together in an unconventional way, it's the standard that you apply to anything else in your life. So I would do the exact same if it's like, well, here's some carpets. Like I'm a few videos away from finding out the way to do it myself. And if anything, it's a cooler story versus like, yeah, we got this carpet from so-and-so and they're great, because that's just like adding into the, just the machine of things. But being able to repurpose and having a little bit of lore behind it is very cool.
I've always wanted to build, like everything from the label from the very earliest days. I wanted to be hands-on. Everything has always been like all the shelves that I had in our Peabody office for 15 years. I built by hand. I mean, they were 2x4s and plywood, but I didn't just go, with a blank check and say, all right, we'll go buy whatever we need. Like, I mean, everything was built from the ground up, and we've repurposed all that. I mean, right now, so we have these awesome pallet racks, like floor to ceiling, 12-foot tall pallet racks shelving that we got from Best Buy. And that was a game changer. But for all of our t-shirts and things that we need to have, for day-to-day mail order sales, I'm using my old shelves that I built in Peabody, but now I'm putting them on wheels. Mm-hmm. So like I cut the tops off, I put caster wheels on the bottoms, and we're painting them black and they look nice. And now I can move them around. So we're hoping, we just got our live music permit from the city. So, we'll be able to have small performances. We're not going to be a venue, but we'll, if we have a band that's going to be coming through town, we want to possibly be able to have them play in our warehouse. So right now I'm kind of figuring out how I can make it so that everything that's in there, if we need to move it all and kind of part the seas and open it up so a band can play, we'll have that flexibility. So, and again, these are all things that all the shelving I started building 10, 15 years ago,
Yeah.
and we're just repurposing it now.
Yeah, that's very cool. With the store, the location of it, you were mentioning it's a very busy street. There's a lot of things like Death Wish is just down the street from y'all. There's a bunch of breweries. Was that very important to like be, if because we've talked about it before on the podcast where it's like, and we talked about it a little bit earlier in the interview. It's like hardcore makes the unconventional things cool. And it's kind of the same thing with the geographical side where it's like I never in my life would think about like, oh, I'm gonna spend a weekend in Oklahoma. But like the reason that I have friends there because of a fest and all these other things, it kind of adds to that. So like obviously like Boston has a lot of other things going for it when it comes to tourism, but like when it comes to the hardcore side of things, was it important to be in a location that if there were people who were in town for a show, on tour, even just outside of anything music related, it was like it wasn't just like you're going to this like random part of the town or wherever you guys were based. Did you wanted to be able to like if you're gonna come see us, there's a bunch of other shit to do as well.
Yeah. Well, and that's when we started announcing and promoting the fact that we're here. We made a list of all the other cool shit that's in the area because there's other cool record stores. There's other cool I mean we're obviously hardcore and punk rock. There's another record store right down the road that's mostly hip hop, and they're awesome. And I think the city, most people aren't even aware of how cool it is that they have that store. This store called Soundtracks, in their community. We have a really cool kind of more metal stoner rock record store called Residency. We're all three stores are within a 5-minute drive, which is very cool. There's a barbershop down the street where the first time I went and got my haircut, the guy was wearing a Warzone shirt, and so it's like two hardcore punk guys that have this really cool traditional barbershop, and so I like to support them. There's kind of this subculture vibe here. I mean, that exists in this city that we're hoping to contribute to that doesn't exist in a lot of other cities. I mean, we're only one town over from Salem, Massachusetts, that gets a ton of tourism. So, that's helpful for us. I think when people are coming, especially in October, that are coming from out of the country or out of other parts of the country, we're just 5 minutes away. So
yeah. So a lot of people are like, Kurt's been someone I've talked to as well and understand the whole the ghosts and ghouls aspect of Salem.
Yep.
But is that the reason that people are coming in October to do some of those like not haunted house, but like some of those kind of tours or experiences?
Yeah, so Salem, obviously, people know it's got the history of the witch trials, but it has become a Halloween themed destination. So there are, tons of there's wax museums, there's haunted this and a Ouija museum, like things that aren't specific to the witch trials, but kind of are part of, just a degree of separation away from kind of the Halloween feel. So there's been multiple Halloween themed movies that have been filmed in Salem. So it's just become this destination for people. Probably the biggest Halloween destination in the United States. So the tourism is crazy and overflows. So we're thankful for it.
Yeah. So Chris, I have a Patreon question that I'm going to ask you, and for the listeners, like now that we have the Patreon set up, certain tiers, like everyone gets notified when I'm having someone like yourself or anyone on the show. And then there's certain tiers that allow those people to submit a question for me to answer. So I always include one of those for the main episode, and then once we move to the after show portion, there's a couple other that I may ask you as well. But the question I have is from my friend Matt, and he wanted me to ask you about the infamous Bridge 9 board. And that has been brought up a lot from some other people on the show as far as like their entry point into hardcore and getting a little bit more into the community. And he was just curious, like, if there's any part of you that misses any of the drama of the Bridge 9 boards and just that culture of like hardcore forums and some of those things, because even though you don't really see those a lot today, like hardcore Twitter is like kind of the replacement of that. So I'm just kind of curious if you have any perspective thoughts on that, things that you wish went differently, or you think played out the way that it should have?
So I don't miss any of the drama. I don't miss. I mean, we were the kind of uh, benefactors, or like we were like the people that had created the board, and it was just one board, one of many boards, right?
Hmm.
Like the PHP, kind of bulletin board like software. Um, why people came to ours when they did at that time, maybe it was we were just in the right place at the right time. But it obviously it cultivated like this huge audience. I mean, we would have 1,000+ people on it at any one moment, which was significant. I mean, we dealt with all sorts of headaches and all the people, people that would. I mean, it was an moderated board. I mean, we had people that were moderators that would be, paid to post. They'd have like an office job and they would have moderator status, and they could kind of deal with some issues and delete things as they saw fit. But it was kind of a wild west. So, I mean, drama and bullshit that would happen on there, we would be tied in because of the name and because we hosted it, but we had nothing to do with it. We didn't post it. We didn't advocate for, a lot of these things. So, there's some hilarious and really funny things. There was some, kind of annoying things. There was things that were like in poor taste, and we just kind of felt like, all right, let people like kind of do their own thing. But it got to the point where the guy that we had hired to handle it was leaving, and nobody wanted to take it over, and we just kind of pulled the plug on it, because it got to the point where it just was more of a nuisance than it was a distraction in a lot of ways. Really great opportunities came out of it over the years. I mean, we were able to send Death for Dishonor on tour with Agnostic Front early on. And one of the reasons why Roger came to us and wanted to work with Death for Dishonor was because of our message board and the ability to push their tour
Okay.
through it. So that was cool. I mean, that was that's great. But then we get like some crazy barber guy that's threatening to sue us, every other week because people were posting memes about him, and it's, like just like I look, we're not here to do this and deal with that.
Right.
We're here to work with bands and push hardcore and punk forward.
Yeah. It's really wild that like I guess the two places that I guess that Wild West nature would happen is Twitter, which is like inarguably like one of the biggest social media platforms, probably, and will go down as such. And then the Bridge 9 board. There's no like,
Yeah.
middle like evolution of those things. But, obviously Twitter has like so many sides to what's being fed in there, and hardcore is like 0.0001% of that. But to have a destination place for the good, bad, and the ugly. But like as someone that is paying to run like some of the back end stuff, like I'm sure that there was like moments where you're like, have I not like cultivated any of this, but like, am I responsible for any of this? But I think you just kind of made a piece where it's like, this is Wild West. And, when it came time to pull the plug, it was maybe a sigh of relief, if anything.
It was. I mean, if we had the infrastructure and the means to kind of build something and grow with it, then it could have been cool and properly moderated, I guess, on some level. But we have limited resources, limited focus, and that just wasn't on the top 10 of things that I wanted to focus on. So
Sure.
it didn't make the cut.
Yeah. So any like you mentioned a really like positive thing that came from that. Is there anything that was like I'm sure there's probably a lot of bad, but is there anything like hilarious that you remember from the forum days that comes to mind? And that could be one of the last things that we could talk about.
I think the best one was probably the Jeep bra guy. That I think there was the Jeep bra meme, and somebody found him and brought him to the board.
Okay.
I don't know, that was like a very big full circle thing, because I think it was like, it was that picture of the guy hanging out the, like screaming out the side of a Jeep, and he became the Jeep bra guy, like bra, BRAH. And it was, someone I guess found him and then brought him to the board, and he posted, and it was like this I don't know, this very funny full circle moment.
It was almost like, oh, a celebrity is here in
Yeah,
our
yeah,
world.
it
I
pretty
see.
much, yeah. So, I mean, I don't, and it sounds really dumb, kind of like as I'm retelling it, but um, yeah, I think there was, I don't know, there was too many distractions and too many, there's people that were building their brands off of it, which was cool. I mean, there was people that were, it became a really good way to network and connect with people.
Mhm.
Um, but again, we just didn't have the bandwidth to give it the attention that it needed to keep it healthy and keep it manageable.
Yeah, yeah, the key word there is obviously healthy because I think there's a lot of things can build up and, like anyone that builds anything, like the goal is to trying to generate like to get as many eyes as possible on whatever you're doing. But if that is happening, but it's like a toxic place, like the majority of it is a toxic place and it's actually like not something that is resonating with the overall vision of what you're doing, then yeah, like in time it's like, okay, I think we should either leave this be, and then when the opportunity came to maybe like, okay, maybe it's time to retire this. But yeah, it's things already happen so much on Twitter where it's like I'll get notified about it like within a moment's notice. So, the
Yeah.
fact that it's resurfaced there is totally fine. Um, Jumping back to stuff with the store and other things within your world that are current. Sully's is a huge part of what you do as well, and you've talked about it on multiple podcasts about how there's been a lot of like Sully's was almost something that was fueling the ability for Bridge 9 to put out multiple releases. I won't get you to retell the $500 fist fight story because you've told that so many times. But the one question I had was this came up with the band Citizen.
Yeah.
So Matt was on the show, and that's a band to me that has like kind of reached out of the stratosphere of like alternative or even just hardcore. So I was asking him like, are you playing shows where you can like that's a hardcore kid and that person just likes the latest record that's more like dance rocky that we've been doing. So that question to you is, are there people that are like diehard Sully and Bridge 9 people, or are you able to like, when someone walks into the store, you're being like, you're gonna walk, there's no way you're going to the record side, you're going to the Sully
Yeah, yeah.
side.
We definitely have both, but so just to give context to your listeners, we have in the retail store there's two sides. When you walk in to the left, it's all music, all vinyl, and when you walk into the right, it's all kind of Boston centric sports apparel under the Sully's brand.
Mhm.
And that's the brand that we started to raise money originally for Bridge 9 and basically take money from sports fans, put it into punk rock records. And after all these years, they've both coexisted in a warehouse. Now we have our first opportunity to show it in one retail space. But we had learned over the years that there's people that loved Have Heart, but also wore Sully's, sports T-shirts. And for many, many years, I didn't really acknowledge Sully's. Kind of we just kind of just did it in the background behind the, kind of behind the curtain.
Mhm.
But then over the years, realized this is actually kind of a cool brand on its own, and so we do have people that will come in and they'll buy a Sully's T-shirt and an LP, which is very cool.
Mhm.
There are definitely people that come in and just go straight to the left, and people that go straight to the right. But
Or someone that
there's
goes one way and they're like, oh, I'm in the wrong, and then turn around and go
yeah,
the other
yeah.
side.
They'll kind of like they'll come in because they're into punk rock, and they'll look around, and then they'll kind of walk over, and be like, oh no, turn around and come back. But so it is kind of a weird retail concept. I think in any other city it might not make sense,
Mhm.
but in the Boston area, there is a lot of people that love repping Boston teams and are into sports, but also into punk rock.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting the duality of those worlds for you, and the things that you've done to be able to hack and being able to like pull these things off of like being really hardcore like street centric and like selling stuff like in between games and having to dodge the cops and all of that, but in order to like put out a bunch of great records, and now I'm sure there's like a little bit of not like full dependency, but especially in the early days, like it's been really cool to hear a lot of the ways that you went about doing things to be able to do that. Do you go to like any games, and do you like there's still people that are selling like those kind of shirts like in that way that you were doing like 20 years
Yeah, yeah.
ago at this point,
So Sully
or even
still has a
earlier than that? Yeah.
yeah. It's been 23 years. I mean, we still have a vendor. We used to be the vendors. It was us and our friends and people in our bands that were the ones selling all this stuff. And then over the years, obviously people get older. You're not really recruiting people, and it gets to the point where it's not worth it. I mean, there was a diminishing return down there.
Hmm.
At one point, it was all cash. People are just throwing money at you, and you know, people were carrying less cash, and it wasn't uh, the ability to take credit cards and stuff didn't really exist for a while for
Right.
us. And so we did start selling to a vendor that had been down there even before us, but had like this kind of established booth. So you can still get Sully's brand products right there outside of the games. But we're also in Target, which is one block away, and we have like our own dedicated kind of Sully's brand showroom in a Target store next to Fenway Park.
Hmm.
So that's been a very cool opportunity for us as we've grown and gone in a different direction. We still have a presence, but it's not the same scrappy getting chased by code enforcement police kind of style that we used to have.
Right.
Um, you know,
Like I think I was listening to an interview where you were talking about like, certain people that were a part of the park that were like, oh, like, we can only go at these times because they're aware of us, but like, these are the times where it is best for us to show up, sell a couple shirts, and then bounce. Has there been anyone on like a bigger like baseball like scale that has either referenced you guys like that is aware of like of Sully's, or has it been like that was the first that I got was just like the park security?
um, I don't know if I'm following. Do you mean like in terms of other people in other cities that have
Yeah, like
published?
yeah, if there's anyone like on a like certain baseball players that are like, oh yeah, Sully's is all like like anything like that has like, oh, this has gone beyond just like just our local town and the team that it's a part of.
Yeah, I mean we've it's so 20 years ago we were the nuisance, the establishment, the team, and the and everything around it didn't want anything to do with us. Um, as we grew and we expanded and changed kind of what we were doing a little bit, originally it was everything was anti New York, and really feeding into the rivalry with the Yankees and the Red Sox. As we grew, I started focusing less on rivals and more on our own team and in the city, and we trademarked Believe in Boston, which has kind of become an opportunity for us to do a lot of fundraising and support charities through that slogan over the years. But one of the things that we found was that the people that were our fans early on, and they were in college, just college kids, like going to a game and buying one of our shirts, um, were moving, growing and moving into positions of authority.
Hmm.
So, like a good example was a woman that we've um, worked with through the Jimmy Fund. Is this big, amazing charity in the Boston area that promotes it fundraises for cancer research, and they've been very active with the Red Sox. The woman that was in charge of corporate sponsorships for the Jimmy Fund and who we ended up working with, has this amazing job with, but when her first introduction to Sully's was as a college kid buying T-shirts, like offensive, rivalry based T-shirts,
Right.
and so people kind of grew up with us in a way, and have given us opportunities to I wouldn't say redeem ourselves, but just opportunities to do things on a higher level,
Hmm.
um, which we would not have been given, early on.
Yeah, I think the longevity piece of that is only possible moving to the positive side of things, because there's a lot of people that can get the the pop or the buzz off of like a not controversial, but like something that's a little bit more edgy, a little bit more out there, pushing on people's buttons. But I do think that it was probably it clearly was the right move to move to something that was a little bit more positive, Boston centric, and then that has had a trickle down effect into being able to raise money for charities and different things. I don't know if you have a goal with Sully's to one day, hopefully like making like exclusive Red Sox like Sully's brand merchandise, or being
Sure.
able to throw a first pitch or whatever. Um, does anything is anything like a pipe dream idea when it comes to that?
So, I mean, what I want to do with Sully's is I want to continue to grow it to be a brand that can have licensing opportunities with all of these institutions that we've loved and respected over the years. So whether it's doing officially licensed merchandise for the Red Sox or for the Bruins, Celtics, Patriots, we've collaborated with them on different levels. We've worked with the Red Sox, the Red Sox Foundation charity. We've designed T-shirts for them, and all their players have worn them. And we've done deals with players that are direct, but they're not licensed by the Players Association. It's just something that's kind of a one-off. But things like the Believe in Boston trademark, I mean, it's become almost ubiquitous in the Boston area. I mean, we've been doing it for almost 20 years, and it's been there for all these different events, and has been repped by a lot of the players and a lot of the teams. Whenever they're in the championships, they're all their Twitters say, hashtag Believe in Boston. And that's something that we created. So I think there are opportunities for us to continue to grow. I mean, right now, we have licensing opportunities with like the local colleges, like Boston College, and we've done one-offs with players, but there's more legitimate things that I'd like to do. I mean, having our first brick and mortar store, I think, is a step in the right direction. I know a lot of these leagues won't deal with people that just exist on the internet. They want something that's real, and that's what we're trying to build.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Like there are certain moves that if you're wanting to do some of those things, like having a storefront and having a place that people can go and buy merchandise and even have like meet and greets and all that. Like I hope that there's maybe one day where there's like certain members of the Red Sox that are doing like a pop-up Q&A kind of event,
Yeah.
next to a bunch of like Bridge Night records.
Yeah.
I think just the crossing of those worlds is really, really cool. So speaking of the crossing of worlds and people people that you wouldn't expect to be tied to the stuff that you've cultivated and curated, and anytime that this pops up on my feed, it's always just like I have a what the fuck moment. It's
Yeah.
anytime you are sharing a paparazzi photo of Ben Affleck with a Bridge 9 shirt or Sully's brand shirt.
Yep.
Talk to me about like we're like you've talked about it a couple times, and it sounds like you've been able to at least like meet him, and there's a couple cool things there. But like, talk to me about the very first time that popped up on your radar, as far as like he's aware, or how did that even happen?
So in 2004, we made a T-shirt that said "Killin' with Shillin'," and it was riffing on Kurt Schilling, who was a pitcher for the Red Sox. He had just come to the team. He was a big deal. He had just beaten the Yankees, I think, the year before in the World Series. So his number was 38, and so riffing off that as like a pitcher and a gun, we made a T-shirt that had like a 38 special kind of silhouette on it, and put a little baseball as the caliber, with the big number 38 like as a jersey, the Yankee hater across the shoulders. And we Ben Affleck popped up in People magazine wearing the shirt, and there's like a picture of him like kind of like pulling his jacket apart to show it to somebody, and the paparazzi they got that photo. So that was back in 2004, and that was obviously very cool. In 2009, that movie The Town that he did reached out to us, their costume designer, and said, we picked up a few of your shirts. I think they got them at a local store. We'd like to use them in this movie. And of course, we didn't really know anything about what The Town was. They gave us a very brief, kind of synopsis of it. I think Ben Affleck had been in one or two movies prior to that weren't exactly box office hits. So we're just like, all right, this could be cool, whatever. they were, we said, we're happy to let you use those t-shirts, but you should check out our website. We have all this other stuff. And they sent us like a 4-page fax list of everything they wanted. I mean, it was like everything we made. So
One of everything, please.
yeah. And so and they're like, oh, ship it here. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to bring it to you. So I brought it to them, and met with the costume designer, had hit it off with her, had a good rapport. We basically became their print shop for anything that they needed, whether it was fire department t-shirts, or there's a scene. I mean, I remember there was a scene where at the end of the movie where all these kids go out onto the ice of an ice hockey rink, and they're wearing these jerseys, and they had the blank jerseys. They're filming the scene the next day. And they're like, we need the logo printed on them, and somebody dropped the ball. So we were able to print the t-shirts for them.
Which is a very hardcore thing to do, just like plus or minus a couple different details in a different context. But like, someone dropped the show. Can you fill in? Can you print on these? Can you print these shirts for the next day? So yeah, that's very interesting. Well,
and also to the point of putting yourself out there, I think it's very important to you don't just dial things in. Like, they reached out and said, I could have been like, oh yeah, that's cool. Use those 2 shirts, and that would have been it. Maybe they would have used them, maybe they wouldn't have. But we're like, no, please check out all this other stuff. And then I'm not just going to ship it to you and have it show up on a UPS truck. I'm actually going to drive it, bring it to you, and then have that human connection where you meet with somebody. Maybe there's no rapport, and that's it. They sign it and you leave, or you start making small talk. You start like learning more about their needs, and you tell them about yourself. And that's kind of what happened with this. So we were able to become their go-to for all these other opportunities. And I had to wait a year thinking like, oh my God, this is gonna be like a 90-minute commercial for Sully's, because they had taken so much stuff.
Right.
And it wasn't. They ended up, I think 6 of our t-shirts ended up in the movie, and 2 of them, one on Jeremy Renner, one of them on Ben Affleck. And so it was like Christmas when the movie came out. We got to go to the premiere was at Fenway Park, and that was cool. And all of these t-shirts were featured in it. And so that was kind of like our first really big opportunity to have something featured with Ben Affleck. And we were very grateful for the opportunity. So
right. Are you in the credits of that movie where it's like,
no. I probably, maybe I could have negotiated for it. I was just like, oh, it's cool, whatever.
Dope ass shirts, Sully's brand, Chris Wrenn.
Yeah. So we and when COVID happened and everything was locked down, that was at the same time as the 10th anniversary of that movie. So I just mailed a package to Ben Affleck with 4 new t-shirts in it. And it was just like, hey, you helped give us an opportunity 10 years ago. Like, it's crazy. It's been a decade. Thank you. We still greatly appreciate it. And a few of these shirts, and check out some stuff in Boston. And he wore all of them like the next week. It was wild.
That's cool.
I didn't hear from him, didn't like, just started popping up in paparazzi photos, and we're like, oh, that's cool. And then that was a time when we needed it, because our business is based on tourism and sports, and 2 things that disappeared during the pandemic.
Right. Yeah.
So, we needed to drive people to our website, and every time he wore one of our shirts, if people Googled it, they'd find us. And so that helped, a lot. But the crazy thing, and I don't know if we talked about this at all in the past, but so I got a phone call. We commit to this building, right? And we get the keys on a Friday, and it's like a bullshit, like dirty, ugly, like everything's a mess, kind of like empty shell building. And then on Monday, I get a phone call from the location scout for a Ben Affleck movie, and they came in and turned while it was empty, because we couldn't start. The contractor for like the first heavy lifting wasn't able to start for months. So we just had this empty building for a couple months, and the movie came in, the movie The Tender Bar, and it's they were filming next door.
Yeah.
They looked at 30 different bars in the Boston area, and chose the one right next to us. So, we had this 1.5 years of Ben Affleck wearing our t-shirts like on a pretty regular basis, which was very, very cool. And then now the movie he's in wants to use our building like in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So at the
And
time,
not
so
because of you, just purely serendipitously.
completely,
Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, I'm like in this big, empty, dirty, like, don't even know where to start building. And I'm like, I don't even like, what did I just do? What did I commit myself to? Like, is this the end of me? You know, like, and that was this really very cool. You know, not to get hokey, but like the universe being like, all right, maybe you're on the right path, right? Because
Right.
had I not committed to it, I would have been like, fuck, you know. But no, because of that, we did get to meet him briefly, thank him for, you know, continuing to rep the brand, um, connect with his assistant, and basically design a new T-shirt for the movie. So basically, at the end of the movie, when it wrapped, uh, you know, the main actors usually give a gift to everyone that worked on it, and so we were able to design that shirt, print it for him, and it was just like one more cool thing, you know,
Yeah.
kind of a full circle moment.
Very full circle. Yeah, and the question begs, well, I guess like this applies to really anything. Is like, when do you always try to not secretly, but like, do you try to like mention like, oh yeah, we have this hardcore label, we've been doing shit for a long, long time. Like when people are buying Sully stuff, whether it's Ben Affleck or Ben fill in the random last name.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I'm just kind of curious if you got to like mention that, or if you know if Ben Affleck
So
fucks with two-stepping music.
I mean, it's funny because there's, you know, the memes of like, you know, him like in like a Bridge 9 shirt, like looking all swole, like, you know,
Oh, like he's in
referencing
a
him
band
being
pic or
like,
something.
yeah, you know, are hilarious. But I, I, I don't know to, I mean, I actually, in one of the packages, I did include a Terror record, an American Nightmare record. There's been a handful of records that I've sent to him. So I don't know if
Planting a
he's listened to
seed.
them,
Just planting a
you know,
seed with Ben
who knows,
Affleck.
who knows? Um, but yeah, I mean, we what we've created here, and it's, you know, whether it's the taking money from sports fans and putting it into punk rock, and having them both kind of grow and document, you know, both sides of the city with sports and music. I think it's a very unique Boston story that really couldn't have happened elsewhere.
Mm.
So we do lean into it. I think it's kind of sets us apart as a brand. And so we have like pictures of our vendors from 20 years ago on the walls in the store, and we do tell that story. So when people come in, you know, if they're like, they've never been here before, you know, we'll tell them like, oh, like this is, you know, this is why this exists, and this is the relationship between the two. So, and people like it.
So it begs the question, between these two worlds, I'm sure there's a bit of bias. So has there ever been a band that you have put out that you found out are Yankees fans? And has that questioned your
Oh,
judgment about putting that
not at all.
band out?
You know, that's actually kind of the funny irony, because we, for a while, we were doing commercials, local TV commercials for Sully's. We haven't done one in a minute, but we did 4 or 5 of them in a row, and we would always use a Bridge 9 band as the back, like the music to the
Oh,
commercial.
yeah.
And all of them were from New York, whether it was Polar Bear Club or H2O. I mean, every single one was a New York band.
Right.
So it was a, you
Wow.
know, and I mean, we've actually put out, so Bridge 9 as a label, I actually need to go back and do the math, but I think we have put out more records with New York bands in our 28 years than we have with Boston bands, which is kind of wild, but it's a subtle irony, where we're taking something that's, you know, based off of not liking New York, but it's no hard feelings. I mean, you
Oh,
know,
yeah.
if I was in New York, I'd be, you know, talking shit on Boston.
Right. It's very much
You know,
like of a
it's where you come up and where you spend your time, and
yeah.
in your community. And for us, in a lot of ways, it was an opportunity to help something grow.
It's very much like not an East Coast West Coast thing, but it's that same way where it's like, you know, we can talk smack a little bit on each other, but it's all fun and games at the end of the day.
Oh yeah, I mean, nothing but respect for the people in New York that we work with, and I'm obviously, you know, we've had bands that have given us shit over it, you know, usually, you know, in good, you know, kind of in good fun.
Right.
But you know, they get it. They understand the hustle.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, the Yankees suck. Who is the worst Yankee in your opinion? Which Yankee do you despise?
Maybe, I don't know. I never liked Posada, I wasn't a fan of Derek Jeter or A-Rod. Obviously, they made great T-shirt subjects, but they also they just had like this kind of Yankee smile, I think, and smugness, more specifically, that I think I don't know. I think it tends to rub people in Boston the wrong way.
I got you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think one of the last things before we start to wrap up the main episode here, Chris, and then we'll move to the after show section. Something again with you've been doing Bridge Nine, Sully's, all this creative stuff that has become your life and your career and what you do to make a living and all that. But maintaining the momentum of that with the research I've done for this podcast, it seems like you never wavered from that North Star, from that why behind what you were doing. And, obviously like, Scoped at least is in a very, transitionary time, a very like, we're 5.5, almost 6 years in now where we
Yeah.
have
I
things
mean, over
like
200 episodes is wild.
Yeah.
That's a huge achievement.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. Yeah, and I think that there is things on the horizon for us where I'm very excited, but it is that like that those good problems to have is what I've been telling people, where it's like, with scheduling and getting bigger guests and maybe having to do extra things versus like your hardcore friends who will just set up something, with no grievances attached. But I think just like hearing the amount that you've done and just the peaks and valleys of such, like what has been, if you were giving me or anyone listening a piece of advice when it comes to maintaining that momentum, where does your mind go with like the pieces that you wish you were telling yourself or were telling yourself when you were in the first 5 to 10 years of Bridge Nine?
So I think the biggest thing is you just can't stop. You got to always keep that forward momentum going. And for me, I didn't plan on starting a label, but I never stopped.
Mhm.
So like, once that momentum started moving, you just always have to keep, figuring out ways to keep it going. It's not always going to go in the same speed or the same height, but it's just a matter of what are things that you can do to continue to push things along. I mean, when we've had setbacks as a label or as a business, or when we've had things that made it more difficult, I didn't always see it as a problem, because a lot of times it gave me an opportunity to reevaluate. And I've found that some of my greatest opportunities have come out of having my back against the wall. So there's been really, really cool things that wouldn't have happened had I not have some other setback. So you really have to look at it as, I mean, some people are like, oh God, that happened, so now I'm done, or I can't keep moving forward. And the reality is, it's like going to the gym. Like you need to put in the work and hurt, I guess, to grow. And I think for me, it's been finding ways to continue to change and maybe just, all right, if that's not working, maybe we can do this. Or you just really never know what opportunity is around the corner. So you just have to continue moving forward and continue opening doors and see where it goes.
Yeah. And I think like something that I've been really practicing or keeping in mind with anything I do is that like quitting only guarantees that it will never work. Like
Yeah.
always, like, Scoped has again been going on for a long time, and it's like I'm patient enough to know that the hard work will in turn like do something. I'm not setting an expectation that it will be the be all and end all, but the only way that I will see if that is possible is by continuing to do everything. Like a big goal of mine is trying to do one thing a day that helps move the needle just a little bit more
Yeah.
forward.
That's the secret. It's the little things over a long time that make the most change. It's like you can't just be like, oh, this crazy opportunity happened. I mean, you really need to just do a little bit over a long period of time to continue to get where you're going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's been some really flagship episodes that like continue to do really well. There's been a lot of like opportunities with us being able to fly out and cover different festivals. And there seems, I think the last podcast that we were a part of, you were mentioning on everyone who does anything creatively, or not even creatively, but mostly anyone that does anything in life that's like a little bit new and out of the ordinary is kind of figuring it out on the go. Like I didn't like
Yeah.
sit down and plan out how do I create like a destination place that kind of captures all the cool things about hardcore content that I like in a one stop place, but I'm kind of figuring that out as I've been going for the last number of years. And I'm sure that's kind of been the same with Bridge 9 and Sully's, forming these two things that, I think if you put some of the best marketing minds in the world or salespeople into one room, they'd be like, I don't think it will actually work to have a hardcore label and a sports, hater apparel, like at least in the early stages,
Sure.
to be fully connected there.
Yeah, I mean, part of it though is, and things that you're doing right now might become part of your foundation for whatever you do next.
Mhm.
There were things that I've done through Bridge 9, whether like when I first moved to Boston, I did a newsletter, and it was an opportunity for me, I think much like a podcast where you go out and meet people, you talk to them, and you help kind of push whatever they're up to out and build awareness for it. And for me, it was a networking opportunity. It was, like I said before, everything that we've done has been in concert with other people, whether it was somebody that just opened a door for us and we walked in, or we worked together on something. And so for the period of a year, I did this newsletter every month, 12 issues. And it wasn't a heavy lift, but it was something that kind of put me outside of my comfort zone. I mean, when I was doing this, I was still kind of new, in the city, didn't know a ton of people. I knew I had some very good friends in the city, but it's a diverse subculture and a different diverse uh, community. So like, kind of have to go out there and network. And it's not something that is like a big part of my story, but it helped open doors to do other cool things.
Hmm.
And it's just one of those things that you just have to continue to keep putting yourself out there.
Yeah, like I think so. I don't know if you feel the same about this, but I love testing things. I love being able to like try doing something for like 6 months or a year, and then over time, if it doesn't really like, if it's not the thing, I will either take a break from it and come back to it like a half a year later, um, or like or change things altogether or just leave it in the past and leave it as its own. We did this for 4 months and whatever, it's there, you can go check it out. But like sometimes I have caught myself where it's like, oh well, this is the thing that I'm known for, and I kind of like pander to that, and it's like, do I have to do this if I'm actually not like passionate about it? And you
Yeah.
mentioned that a little bit with like, as a label should evolve, as well as the person who's deciding what bands are going on them. Their tastes and their preferences on different genres evolves and changes over time. So there should be a reflection there. But I love as a content creator, as a creative person, to be able to like, I have all these ideas and I might just like do it just for the sake of doing it, and like even just to scratch the itch a little bit. But sometimes,
Sure.
like, to your point, sometimes that one little thing that you don't expect to have any like to be the thing can bring you a huge opportunity that connects to everything else that you're doing.
Absolutely, that's true. I mean, you do need to constantly challenge yourself. You need to find new ways of doing something, and then taking whatever you learn and bringing it back into the fold, and hopefully whatever you do next is that much cooler, that much more interesting.
Yeah. So, Chris, I'm gonna pause and say this will be the end of our main public facing conversation. We're gonna continue chatting just a
Cool.
little bit after into our after show section of the podcast. But the way that we end all the main episodes is I always ask the guests to end on a favorite mosh related story. So that's anything that's first your mind. Could be wholesome, could be gruesome, could be something you did or happened to you, or was just at a show that you were attending. Whatever's first to your head is how we start to wrap up.
Okay. So, I mean, I think a notable one was Hellfest in the summer of 2000. I was there, and Converge was playing, and I climbed. I mean, I was never a mosh guy. I was more of a stage dive
Mhm.
person. Like when I was younger, I liked jumping off things. So I I was at at that venue in Syracuse, and I climbed to the top of these speakers, and I jumped off of them. I mean, this is like, I don't know, it feels like 8 or 10 feet above people's heads, jumping off of this, and my foot hit the lights, like the big bar of lights that were like over the stage.
Oh, while you were kind of
Yeah,
flipping?
like when I like jumped and like kind of like hit my foot, and it kind of like started to move a little bit, and I guess people were like, "Oh shit!" Like, you don't obviously want that to
Right.
fall.
Yeah, you don't wanna
Um,
hear a timber at the show.
yeah, yeah. So I think they actually I think they had a very strict no stage diving policy after that. Um,
Right.
and years later, somebody that was in a band that I worked with, I had found video of it, so I posted it, and somebody in between it happening and me posting this, had been in a band on Bridge Nine, and was like, "I have a photo of that." He's like, "I didn't know it was you, but like I have a photo of you jumping," and so like there's like this crazy photo of me like upside down, kind of like yelling, like with like Converge in the background, and I'm
Right.
like
Wow.
over the crowd, that I've been able to, it's in my top 10 photos now
Top
of
10 photo, yeah, with stage
random events in my lifetime. So
Yeah, I love, sometimes it takes one mosh move for a mosh policy to be to be added,
yeah,
but, at least you got some good photo evidence out of it.
yeah,
Yeah. So, Chris, again, thank you for coming on. We're gonna keep chatting a little bit just after
cool.
here. Anything you wanna plug, shout out, or send the people off, who are listening to the main episode?
So, I mean, just check out Bridge Nine socials and website. We're still grinding it out, building out our warehouse. So, if there is something like we put together this really cool Raid the Archive 5 record collection of stuff that had been in our files that we had never released on vinyl. We used it as a fundraiser for kind of building out our record store, and we still have copies of that available. So if you missed out, if you want to grab it, there's some of our heaviest hitters are in that collection, and we're again continuing to use it to kind of get our warehouse ready for hopefully having bands play back there. So grab a Bridge Nine T-shirt. If there's something that we're up to, that you're into, check it out. Show us whatever support you can, and we appreciate it.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of dope stuff, current and huge staple pieces within the hardcore universe that are all within the Bridge Nine store. So highly recommend all the listeners to go check that out. Check out Sully's as well if you're a Yankees hater or you just like
Yeah.
cool shirts and want to be like Ben Affleck. Chris and I are going to keep chatting. Um, if you want to listen to our after show portion with Chris, that will go live the day that this podcast goes public. So that will be on the Patreon feed, which will be in the description as well. Chris, I'll see you in a bit. But again, this is a really fun chat, and we're going to keep it
Awesome.
going.
Thank you so much, Spencer. Appreciate it.